I tweeted, DM me for the first chapter, and I've DM'd 4,000 people. The goal is to build super fans. You do that one by one, and it really just doesn't scale. Someone asked me, how do you have time to reply to 4,000 DMs? You have cause and effect reversed in the sense. The reason I have that many followers is because I do crazy stuff like this that most people won't do. If you can just have one phrase that people associate with you or your book, something that allows other people to tell your story, because ultimately that's where all the growth is truly going to happen. It's like SEO. You want to come up with something that you just become linked to intrinsically. It becomes a virtuous cycle. You become the default, and that means you get put in more places, and everyone says, oh, if you're interested in lean startups, here's the book. You kind of have to figure out, how do you get that? I think if you rely on a launch, the problem is you got one shot. Did the tweet go viral or not? I don't want to rely on a single day or a single tweet. That's not my control.
When I was doing my first one, I didn't want a job as a book marketer. I didn't have a platform. So what else works? Oh, well, you can do the PR wave. That's like a 1 in 10. And it's pretty delicate and skillful to be able to ride the PR wave. And then the last one, the only other one I could figure out is, can I make it fundamentally recommendable and long lasting? And that puts all the pressure on the product design. But I loved it because it started to feel like a tech product. I find a customer who cares, debug it. If they're not getting to the end and getting value, then they're not going to recommend it. So where are people giving up? Where are they getting confused? Where are they getting bored? And just working it like that. Those books sell themselves. They found their audience. They're solving a problem. And so they grow through word of mouth.
You even see this in fiction. Every kid reads Harry Potter. Harry Potter, unless it gets unseated by some other series, which I don't see happening anytime soon, because it's just a network effect is so powerful. Everyone wants to know what house you're in. And it's like, okay, great. I have to go read Harry Potter. I don't know what you're talking about. It's part of the life cycle. I noticed this with Gumroad as well over time. The best products are part of someone else's life cycle. Everyone is trying to get into the creator economy or Notion, right? Or like learn to design. There's something that people really want. If you become the book that every entrepreneurship class in high school or, MBA program, right? Because then every year Harvard Business School buys 1,000 of those books. You have to do nothing for that. That's the other really powerful thing. If you can just have one phrase that people associate with you or your book. I did this actually, is I went through my Twitter and I went through all my most viral tweets. I have a chapter on sales from SHL, sort by anything that's been retweeted over 500 times or whatever metric. And then I would copy paste them all and I'd be like, where do I insert these? Almost like Kindle highlights. People have already told me that these are the ideas that are resonating with them, like creator first, entrepreneur second, for example. Made to Stick is basically all about that. The most viral stories are not the ones that you are able to tell really well. I can explain the whole book in a sentence, and I'm using the book to explain this concept, and they're doing what they say you should do. But the goal is to create something that allows other people to tell your story, because ultimately that's where all the growth is truly going to happen. Atomic Habits, I believe, is the top non-fake book right now, and it has been for a long time. And I think it got to that sort of escape velocity where it is super short. If you think about how Spotify and YouTube have shrunk the length of the song, I think that's also kind of happened in books to a degree, not as extreme. But Atomic Habits is short. You can listen to that audiobook in like 4 or 5 hours. You could probably read it in 2.5 hours or less. And that person reads it and tells somebody else.
I think of it as the recommendation loop or the recommendation trigger. What's the moment that causes someone to specifically recommend this book as the solution to another person? And so in your case, the minimalist entrepreneur, one example I could see for that is someone goes, I want to start a business, but VCs just seem like such a hassle, or like, oh, I want to start a business, but I don't want it to take over my life. They've tried it once and they're so burned out. And when someone says that, you're going to go, oh, you got to read this book. You got to read The Minimalist Entrepreneur. So that's the recommendation loop. Sometimes a book will have several of them. It might have one in an academic context, professional context, friendly context. You can write those. And there's actually been books I was really excited about where once I wrote out the recommendation loop, I was like, this isn't going to grow. There's no trigger for this book to get recommended unless I'm a celebrity, which I'm not. And that was enough to stop me from writing the book because I couldn't figure out the situation in the real world where my book would be the answer.
That is a really good point. For me, what I have noticed is I want to be an entrepreneur. I don't know how to start. Or I want to be a creator. I don't know how to start. I want to make a living. I hate my day job. I don't want to have a 9 to 5, like that sort of thing. It's really interesting to think about what conversations are people already having, because they need to be already having them. There's no way to make them have that conversation. Definitely with reflecting on my failure to build $1 billion company, that's what happened, right? Everyone was talking about Uber and WeWork and Theranos. We're over-indexed on that bubble of tech and all this kind of craziness. The other thing I noticed actually is if I published that essay today, I don't think it would have done nearly as well, even with my much larger audience, because I'm not nearly as much of an underdog as I was before, because COVID and the creator economy and a lot of these things have sort of happened. But then the other thing is even the word $1 billion company isn't as interesting anymore. 2.5 years ago, even that was like the barometer of success. Every startup founder could identify with wanting to build $1 billion company. It was like unicorn. There was like even a word to describe it. Whereas today, when you talk to founders, they're like, I want to build a 10 billion. That metric doesn't even seem to be that interesting anymore. But that would not be a compelling title, right? Like 10 billion. It's not nearly as catchy as 1 billion. And so sometimes you can't even time the market. You just like hope, get lucky.
You stay out there and you adjust. That's why you kept changing your title.
And it's a lot easier to pick a narrower topic. Certainly, if you were Bill Gates, you could say entrepreneurship, principles by Ray Dalio, something like that. But otherwise, like either people are buying the book or they're supporting you, right? They're either buying your book or they're buying the book. It happens to be by you. Your name does have value, but I think to a lot of potential people, you could have a totally different name on there and it would still do quite well in the sense of Amazon ranking, actually selling books on an ongoing long tail basis. Because people have intent, just like when they Google for something, they want that thing. Mine is a little bit more broad. Penguin calls these big idea books, where you have to find the people who care deeply about what the big idea of the book is. You need a compelling big idea, but it's either the best of both worlds or the worst of both worlds. It's like SEO in the sense that you've tried to pick something, but it's not that specific. It's very abstract. It's not like someone's going to Google minimalism plus entrepreneurship. But if it does hit, if it does become a term, then it becomes easier. Like 4-Hour Workweek did this really well with lifestyle design. Like that's the book. And the big bet that I'm making, frankly, with this book, I don't actually mention this anywhere because I don't want to tie too much to the times, but it's really the first post-COVID business book. How do you start a business post-COVID or during COVID, wherever you are in the world? Obviously, remote work is now a thing. No code, creator economy, all these sort of cycles have stacked on top of each other. And so building a business today is very different than it was even 3 or 4 years ago. You have Figma, Notion, no code, Zoom, all of these amazing tools and resources out there for free. And so I think there's maybe a way to say, hey, this, if you want to start a business today in 2021, you can't read 4-Hour Workweek. It's not, I mean, you can, it's great, but like, you know, if it's not that actionable, right?
Like it captured a moment.
Yeah, it captured a moment and it did it amazingly well, right? That was like and perfect timing. And that's a lot of what a lot of these kind of big ideas come down to. It's like not really up to you. When I published Reflecting on My Failure to Build a $1 billion Company, it in hindsight was the perfect time because basically Uber, WeWork, Theranos all happened. I think Uber had gone public and was down and was vastly unprofitable. Today, COVID has shown that maybe these big tech companies provide a lot of value. You may still disagree with them on a lot of things, but we need Amazon, we need Zoom, we need a lot of these tools now that we maybe didn't feel as necessary and fundamental to society. And the initial title of this book actually was Stop Chasing Unicorns. It was very much don't do that. And obviously now I have my own venture fund. So it's like, all right, I got to come up with this new angle. And so we came up with this new title. And between those two titles, it was called The Minimalist Business. And that was too close to The Lean Startup as the title. It focuses on the person, which I think is pretty cool. A lot of these ideas and books focus on the business or the lifestyle design, but no, it's about you ultimately. I wanted to reference the founder, the entrepreneur. And I'm not a huge fan of the word. It feels almost stodgy, but it's accurate. It's exactly what I wanted to describe in the book, which is this idea of entrepreneurialism, which is taking risks and doing things from scratch and going from 0 to 1.
It's been interesting for me to experience and see within our little authors community how long it takes to find the description, the title, the subtitle, the scope, the promise of the book. And it feels like something that you should have already when you start. But it actually appears to be much more exploratory, where the author almost feels like I have something worth saying and I know it's important and I want to find the place in the world, the fertile soil where that idea can grow. But it's a bit of a compromise.
I totally agree with you. Speaking of gardening, have you heard of the sort of gardener versus architect metaphor? There's two kinds of writers. There's people who garden, which is a bottoms up approach where they just explore and react to what's happening. They don't know where the ending is. So this is Stephen King or George R. R. Martin often means that the endings are not as great. They kind of fall apart because they aren't as thought through. They're not a system, but the characters are generally more multidimensional. They do more interesting things. And you can almost tell when you read a book, oh, this is that kind of book. If you read a Brandon Sanderson book, it's pretty obvious that he's on the other side where his characters are a little bit flatter because they're kind of built to fit into a system because he's really excited about his ending. And that ending needs like these 4 things to happen at the same time. Marvel is very architected. Generally, that's what the trade-off is. Some people call it pantsing, writing it off the seat of your pants versus outlining. But ultimately, everyone's in the middle, right? Ultimately, everyone has to figure that out. But it definitely requires faith because you have to have some idea of this very blurry theme and also some confidence that you're going to be able to pull it off, but you don't actually know. And you have to write the whole book and then go back and be like, what did I write? Okay, these are the themes. And luckily, everything about the book roughly worked out. And it's faith. And in the filmmaking industry, there's a great line. Every movie is a miracle, even the worst movie, because it's so hard to make a movie. You literally don't know. People are like, oh, Squid Game or Harry Potter got denied 50 times. And this is the story of the underdog, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, look, no one really knows. No one knows.
The truth is in the audience's head. Do they want to buy it? Do they want to read
Exactly.
it? Do they want to act on it? We do our best as creators, but
what does the market want? The market's going to do what it's going to do. You have to almost like play the meta game, right? If a business book's not that interesting, what can I make interesting about the process of writing the business book? I did this weekend project where I built a business from scratch, live streamed on YouTube, 15 hours there for anyone to see. Obviously I run Gumroad in a very transparent way. And like, I do that because like most people don't care. Like Gumroad shipped a new feature, 4 likes on Twitter. But if it's like, hey, here are our numbers, what our creators did, or here's a live stream of us building something, like that's the stuff that people want. They want to see the sausage get made, or they want to do something and they want to see other people do it, and they want to be inspired and entertained.
Austin Kleon put this so well in his little book, Show Your Work, because everyone struggles writing a book. What do I share? How do I build this audience? And typically they just finish the book and they go, it exists, please buy it. And that's pretty suboptimal. Austin's like, share your research, share your dead end, share your process. It changes between 2 versions, the terrible to the slightly less terrible.
I did this with reflecting on my failure to build $1 billion company. I took the first draft from Google and then I put it on GitHub, and then I replaced it with a final published draft and committed that to GitHub, and then I diffed it, and you could see the red and green of the changes. And yeah, trying to find as many of those opportunities as possible.
I wanted to know from a Gumroad perspective, creators who offer 50-page ebook or something for free, are those downloaded more than if they were charged?
I think the number is 8x or something like that. Not all of those 8x are going to be useful. A lot of people go on there, download a bunch of icons or download a bunch of ebooks. That doesn't necessarily mean that they read them. Certainly you do get the emails of all those people. So we often see that where people will do a free 0+ product, get thousands and thousands of emails that way, use it as a lead magnet on their blog or what have you. Use those emails, either use the Gumroad post feature or take them to MailChimp or ConvertKit. There's a couple of interesting things. Like one person, Wait But Why, I think they took their blog posts and turned them into a PDF and sold that. So the blog posts were free. And then if you wanted the PDF, you could get that. I've also seen the PDF is free. And then inside the PDF, click here to get the paperback version of it. The thing that's really optimized for distribution and reach. And then you have the thing that's really optimized for ultimately making a living.
That reminds me of a twist in the fiction business model where they've realized that when you do a series, so if you've got 3+ books, it starts behaving like a fundamentally different product. Say you're self-published, you make $5 per book. If you've got a series that's 10 books long, you're essentially making $50 by selling the first book, if the first book's good. Because once people are hooked on the first book, they read all of them, which changes the amount you can spend on book promotion. One of the challenges with book marketing is that it's a low margin product. So you can't spend a lot. But if you've got a series, suddenly you've turned it from a $5 margin to a $50 margin. And if you've got digital upsells and stuff on Gumroad, I've even talked to people who write the first 3 books before they release any of them. Now you got to be confident there because you're tripling your downside if you screw up.
Brandon Sanderson told me when I took his class, everyone wants their first book to be a hit, but especially in fiction, the best thing could happen is that your 10th book is a hit because then boom, all those people are going to go back. He said a new reader for him was worth around $130 because he just has so many books, so much content, and also merch and like other things that kind of play into it over time. He's probably underestimating that number.
I'm pretty sure I spent more than $130 on his books.
Yeah. And the people who read 10 books, they're not just paying for 10 books now. They're also deep fans of his and are there for life. That really can move the needle. I think in nonfiction, it's harder to get a series in that way.
How much time did you actually spend from the conception to the final publishing?
I've actually wanted to calculate this pretty specifically. February 2019, Penguin reached out. It was probably like 10, 20, 30 hours, just thinking about it, talking to people, to a point where I'm going to try to do this, meeting with agents and some of these things included in all that. So less than 50 hours to get to like, I'm probably going to do this. And then I would say the proposal was probably another 50 hours of back and forth, getting to a proposal, writing the sample chapter. So that was probably 50 hours, so 100 hours so far. Then I started writing the book in earnest. The first draft I sprinted through January of 2020. I didn't intend to run a company while writing a book while it was growing really fast and being a VC. When I signed the book deal in 2019, pre-COVID, I was like, I'm just writing the book in 2020. Gumroad's ticking along, it's fine. That was kind of the point of the book. And then things happened. So I did more than I expected, but part of the secret was I had to agree to all the things and now I have to execute on them. The first draft, probably another 100 hours or so. I would basically wake up and I write 3 hours a day, every day. I try to write 2,000 to 3,000 words, just sprint through, probably wrote like 50,000 words that way. Just a terrible vomit draft. I have one goal when I start writing a book, which is just get to the end as soon as possible. It has to make some sense, but it can be absolutely terrible until I get to the end. The first draft is really an outline for the second draft. And only by the third draft do I even know roughly what the chapter outline is.
That rings true for me. Third draft is about when I start thinking about beta readers and sharing it. The first drafts are just for me to think through it and find the structure and clear out the cobwebs, so to speak.
And the majority of the effort was actually in the editing for me. So I did this course that I taught, and part of that was actually to make sure the content was really good. So I sent everyone chapter by chapter, and then people would give me feedback. So I had 150 people give me feedback on each chapter. So I had like hundreds and hundreds of comments. And that was the majority of the work, I think, just going through, adding examples. That was incredibly time consuming. A lot of small things. it's like giving feedback on the illustrations. The cover probably took 20, 30 hours all in. So a lot of those things kind of add up, maybe like 500, 600 hours, but that doesn't include marketing at all.
If you really want to do the iterations on beta reading and really work in the reader comments and all of that, that adds calendar time, not just clock time, because in many cases you're sitting waiting for feedback to come in. And so it changes the tempo. Like the first draft is clock time. If you can just write for 8 hours a day and get words done, then you move through it faster. Whereas beta reading and like revising, I find a lot of it is I just need to put the book on ice and think for a week. Okay, I get what's wrong. What do I want to do about it?
At one point in the book, the first chapter was Stop Chasing Unicorns. The second chapter was The Minimalist Entrepreneur. And the third chapter was Start with Community. Lisa Demona, my agent, was like, you can't start with the actionable content on chapter 3. You have to get there as soon as possible. And so we basically took the Stop Chasing Unicorns chapter, made it a paragraph or 3 or something, put that in the Minimalist Entrepreneur chapter. Getting to that realization took just tons of moving one thing over here, then moving it back. I would say the hardest thing for me was filling it with examples. I can go on a podcast and talk for 5 hours about startups, right? But if I do that, the examples are not going to be that diverse. I'm going to be picking like the same Basecamp, MailChimp, all the examples everyone is used to. It's going to be a lot of white dudes, like all these sorts of things, which I think is fine for a first draft. The goal is to sprint through it. But when I was editing it, everyone should see themselves in this book. And I really wanted that. And that was a big reason I sent it to so many people and got feedback. And that was really time consuming. If you just go with Googling, then you just use what's top on Google. These are the same examples everybody else uses.
How did you balance the feedback between all these potential readers and your editors and your publisher, all those voices?
I wrote the book in Google Docs and they're like, could you use Word? And I was like, no. But yeah, ultimately there is a point, right, where, okay, you have to fit into their process eventually because they have an editor that is on Windows or can't use your thing. I had to get them on Slack, at least. I think many of them hadn't even heard of Slack before. I get out of my bubble a little bit. I'm like, oh, wow, I have to teach people about Notion. These tools aren't really commonplace for everybody. My editor at Penguin and my agent, we all worked on that single Google Doc. And then when I did the course cohort with 150 people, then I basically split the chapters up. Each chapter is on Google Doc. And then I tried to get that to effectively frozen. They're locked. And then we put it into the doc. And then there's another breaking point, which is once you add all the illustrations and start actually formatting it. Penguin gets like very annoyed if I'm like, could you change this word even? Because they're like, well, I have to get to the designer. Like, this is all BS. Like, it's not that hard. It was a lot of Dropbox. There's a lot of files in there. It also adds a lot of that kind of time and clock time. The feedback loops are just so much slower, and it's not like there's a single master doc. It's not a GitHub repo and everyone can trust it. You can make the word change here, then you have to propagate it into the Google Docs. You have to manually version control yourself. That was quite painful. There was like 3,000 line edits. It also enforces a process for you. You have to use a certain tool. 2 people can't even open it at the same time. You are forced to build a schedule for yourself, which maybe is a good thing. What I would have preferred is, I guess it doesn't even exist, but like Figma for InDesign, and we could just work off a single master doc. Penguin would send me the PDF and I'm like, can you just give me the raw file? And no, we don't trust you effectively, which is probably a good thing. Sometimes I want to get too in the weeds on everything. Even the cover, oh my gosh, the cover was a miserable process, which took like 30 or 40 covers. Penguin do a great job, but they definitely have a process, which is Harvard Business Review style books, white with black and red and very masculine almost, right? This is not masculine. This is pink. It's actually modeled or inspired by protest signs because anyone can participate. It's a sketch, etc. The key word that I came up with, the key to this book, is irreverence. Like, I wanted to write an irreverent business book, a business book that is not that serious and almost pokes fun at the system and the gatekeepers and all these sorts of things. And 2 or 3 rounds into Penguin, I was like, no, the key word is irreverent. We can't have Helvetica new, big, bold. And ultimately I told them, hey, could I hire my friend to do this? It became great. I think very close to getting to the deadline of needing a cover. We cut it pretty darn close. I was able to pay other people to do some of this work. I probably spent, I think, $50,000 or $60,000 on help, on illustrations, on an editor, on someone to help me source these interviews. A lot of publishers expect this. They're like, we're going to give you this money and you should almost spend it all. I'm like, that's weird. How do authors make this work?
Especially because it comes out of your future royalties. It's not extra money. It's like
not,
just your future earnings.
Definitely. This is an unfair advantage that I have, that I can pay a bunch of people to source 300 examples. And that's part of this book. Find ways to get leverage on your time. That's a key concept, which you can do in the beginning, but over time, hopefully you can start to do, right? Penguin Random House is publishing this book, and I told them they have done absolutely nothing. And I'm 100% satisfied with that because that's what I thought. I had zero expectation that they were going to do anything. I put publishers, labels, VCs, and universities in the same bucket, which is effectively they have a bunch of people who want to get in. They pick 100 or 10 or 1%. They put their stamp of approval on it. They give you a little bit of capital, and then they say all this other crap. But truthfully, I really believe that's where their value kind of starts and ends. They do help a little bit in terms of the quality of your product, right? They certainly helped edit it. I had a director with the audiobook. It definitely increases the quality. But in terms of like distribution, in terms of marketing, they probably do have an amazing marketing engine and publicity team for Michelle Obama. And if you look at a lot of these economies, it's a very power law distribution thing. And I can tell you my advance was $115,000. I think Michelle Obama's advance was something like 60 million. And so if you think about where does Penguin make their money, their whole business is going to align around what strategies work for someone like Michelle Obama. And for someone like Michelle Obama, the strategy that they have is basically spam everybody saying, hey, this book is coming out. You can get on Good Morning America or whatever. But for anybody else, it's important to understand what the incentives are.
Sounds like you knew what you were signing up for and you made that choice with eyes wide open. You wanted the support.
I needed the deadline. I wouldn't have done it otherwise. My guess is I will never traditionally publish a book again. I hope to write more, but I do think of it similar to VC actually, where sometimes it is useful if you're new to the industry, if you've never done it before, there's a lot of noise. Penguin has their own strategy. Mine is very different. Mine is going to every business that I patronize and saying, hey, I wrote a book. It comes out on Tuesday. I live in Portland, Oregon. It's very indie. These people hate the system. I notice, I'm like, hey, I wrote this book, comes out on Tuesday. They're like, oh, that's awesome. Good job. And then they'll look and they'll see the Penguin logo. Immediately, they're like, what? You know, self-publishing is amazing. Obviously, I believe that with Gumroad. But I do think in this world, you need something, and it might not be published by Penguin, but I do think it's incredibly important to have some hook about you.
I would say you've got several of those credibility hooks already.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but it is important. Like, for example, if I wrote this book and I wasn't the founder of Gumroad, it would be much harder to sell the book, right? And so you have to find all these things that they're not intrinsic to the book. Because the truth is, if I say, hey, I have a business book coming out, it's about startups and entrepreneurship, like great, right? So does everybody. There's a lot of those books.
Anything that you would give is the crucial advice, the foundational habit?
It won't come down to a single thing ultimately. Authors should know Penguin's not going to market your book for you, really. That sort of thing. Just like startup founders should know that the VC is not going to give you $1 million and then solve all your problems. They're not going to help you hire engineers. If it was replicable, the market would be saturated. There would be no room for you to enter this space. So I try to always remind myself, the harder it is, the less competition I have. You should pick the hardest thing you're able to do to minimize your competition in a sense. And over time, you can tackle larger markets with more competition because you feel like you can win or you can take more risks. But I think in the beginning, you should basically figure out what can you win? What SEO term can you be number one for? David Perel calls this, what's your personal monopoly? You have to get really good at something. Ultimately, people want to consume your content, learn from you. You have to be really good at something. And that just takes time. There are a lot of people who spend a lot of time reading business books. And I'm like, no. The business is the thing that you wrap around your core competency and your skill. That might be design, that might be writing, but ultimately you have some sort of skill. Pick a niche you can win, get really good at the skill, then start teaching, join communities. I think a lot of people obsess over social networks. Oh, I need to go viral on Twitter. I have 250,000 followers on Twitter. It's not going to mean I'm a New York Times bestseller. Those people like my pithy tweets. That's very different. I would say start with communities. That's where you can be heard. I used Hacker News, Reddit. There's a bunch of Slacks and Discords and Circle communities. And this one, right? You want to meet your like-minded folks. Then sales is a one-by-one process. I'm literally going to coffee shops. Hey, I wrote this book, comes out. They'll put it on their Instagram. There'll be 4 or 5 people in their audience that will purchase it because I'm a local and they want to support Portland entrepreneurship. This strategy that used to be applied, Gary Vee speaks at some mega conference and that conference buys a copy per attendee. And now he has 3,000 books. He has a New York Times bestseller. That is the system. Publishers go after people they know can do that. For example, I tweeted, DM me for the first chapter. And I've DM'd 4,000 people over the last 2 months. Every day, 3 or 4 people DM me. I talk about this in the book, but the goal is to build super fans. You do that one by one, and it really just doesn't scale. Someone asked me, how do you have time to reply to 4,000 DMs? I have keyboard shortcuts. I'm not just typing the same message over and over again. I am typing a couple characters per time. You have cause and effect reversed in the sense. The reason I have that many followers is because I do crazy stuff like this that most people won't do. And by the way, when I tweet something, those 4,000 people may be more likely to retweet it. And this is the same reason I love meeting people in person, because if I meet someone in person, I know for the rest of time, if I tweet, they're going to read my tweet in my voice. So my goal is to meet every single person in as high fidelity as early as possible, because it's going to take a lot of time. I got into tech like 10 years ago. I'm so glad that I started building these relationships before I wanted them, just as peers, just as friends, immersing myself in those communities and being open and transparent. I think being comfortable with that level of vulnerability is actually really hard. And then consistency, just do it for ages, right? If you look at my 250,000 followers, that didn't happen overnight. And if I do this for 5 years, I'll have 1 million followers on Twitter, which will seem crazy to somebody. And it'll literally be because 500 people a day follow me for 4 years. It's almost linear. You just do that for 5 years. If you kind of extrapolate what that looks like, if you get 10 people a day for a year, that's 4,000 people. If you have 4,000 people on Twitter, that's significant, especially if you got those 4,000 in a very one-by-one way. Those relationships are probably much more profound and deeper deeper than just they found a viral tweet, they followed you, and then you never hear from them. They're never going to buy your book. They don't even know who you are. They just like your tweets. And this happens all the time. They're like, oh, you're the founder of Gumroad. Wow, you followed me purely for what I tweeted. Like, that's awesome. But, it's surprising to me. I think you have to get out of your bubble. And it's so easy for me to think everyone's in tech. Everyone knows what Notion is. And it's literally 1% of people. Like a billion people know who Taylor Swift is. 10 million people maybe know what Notion is, 100x. And so I always remind myself that when I feel like it's too late, it's actually more likely just early. It's just, I feel late because I'm looking at the early adopters. But most people aren't even using Twitter. I would say Twitter is a must do for your writing. But like, most people don't even use Twitter today. And if they do, they don't use Twitter for the tech or the writing or the productivity stuff. They follow politics and sports and celebrities. So I always try to remind myself of that. If I do make an effort, I will be uniquely qualified, not because I'm better, but because I actually made the effort. You don't compete against those who can, you compete against those who do. There's a lot of people who are better writers than me and run better businesses than me, but do they share about it? I can win that game pretty darn easily. But I really believe if this book does become successful, whatever that may mean, it's going to be a long-term thing, a long tail thing. And so this launch day, October 26th, has no relevance to me. I don't care at all. My goal is October 26th, 2025.